function.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Pastor Hezekiah Walker. I'm the senior pastor here at the Love Fellowship Tabernacle Church in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm telling you, it is going to be explosive tonight. I want to welcome each and every one of you into our church, into our home of worship. Tonight is going to be explosive because it is a much needed conversation as we move forward with the police department and our community. Most importantly, the church, because we kind of been left out a little bit because it's probably been, some of our fault. But we're now in it. You see me, the church wants to be involved. The church needs to be connected, and I'm happy to have this opportunity to be connected tonight. So listen, let's get started. I want everybody to give a round of applause to our police commissioner, Commissioner Shea.
Thank you. Well, Bishop, I'm going to get right into it this evening. And it feels right to be in church because I think that that's exactly what we need at this time. It's been a real tough year, and it's been a real tough period, and some would say longer than that. But we're here tonight to have hard discussions. So without further ado, Terrence, Reverend McCall, Reverend Floyd, Gwen, Ben, let's get right into it. I don't think we have too much time to waste. And when you talk about where we are, I'll just pose a question because this is what I struggle with every day. And some of us have talked before, but where do we go from here? When you look at law enforcement, when you look at policing, particularly in New York City, and we've had a tough time, and we've had tragedies this year. We've had tragedies in this city in prior years. But where do we go from here? We talk about trust, we talk about building relationships. I have the view from the police department of what we're trying to do. What is it that we're not doing? What is it that we have to do better? And that's an open question to anyone.
Well, I think that Gwen can answer that question much better than anybody. So we'll start with her.
Well, I feel that the police department could have more accountability, more transparency, and not cover up when the police officers are doing wrong, because that seems what the pattern is. Whatever they do, they get away with it, even when they're never charged. But even with the departmental trials, what happens is they still try to assassinate the victim and saying what wrong they did, and it's clear that the victim was not responsible for his death. These police officers, the ones who are there, because see, what's wrong is this deep-seated racism. That's the first thing that's wrong. They come to a scene with an agenda, and that shouldn't be. I think in all the communities, everybody should be treated with respect, because they don't go into the white communities and treat, even if they're criminal, they don't treat them like they treat the criminals or the ones who are not even criminals in our neighborhoods. I'll take the pandemic for example. In our neighborhoods, they were beating the boys. They were knocking them down if they didn't have a mask on. In the suburbs, they were going there, and people who didn't have masks, they were handing them out to them. They were treating them with dignity where we was treated with disrespect. And first of all, how are we going to get the communities and the police to come together if we can't even get them to respect us in our neighborhoods? And I think a lot of times the disrespect comes because their superiors is not holding them accountable. I think if the superiors would hold them accountable, it wouldn't be so much disrespect. But the superiors look the other way. I know that it goes by the ranks, and each rank has a commanding officer. But nobody, it goes all the way to the top, but it seems like nobody is willing to hold the police officers accountable. Not saying that all police officers are bad, but when you look the other way, you're still as bad as the bad police officers, because you should hold your partner accountable, because no human should be treated like we see our boys and girls are treated. And just like with the shootings, like when they shoot our children, they shoot them 40, 50, 60, 70 times. I mean, what, they think they're not dead enough? And then you have never, ever, you can't read about where they have ever shot a white man that many times. Not nearly. If they shoot them, they may shoot them once or twice, and that's it. But never these horrific amount of times. So first of all, we have to get together on that. We have to hold the higher ranks accountable, because the police only do what their ranking officers, their ranking commanders let them do. And if that's not addressed, then it's, you know, it's just like children. Children will get away with whatever you let them get away with. And that's the same way with police. Police are your children. And they know when they're going to get punished and when what won't get them punished. So it's got to be more sterner accountability. We have to have more more police officers and more commissioners and commanders to hold their precincts accountable. And that's not being done right now.
Thank you, Gwen.
Yeah, it's not. It's really isn't.
There's a lot, and I'm not going to monopolize the conversation here.
Maybe it's appropriate to hear from Terrence now and then.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah.
If you
15.
I was basically listening to Mama Carr, and I agree with the transparency. Being not the younger generation, but closer to the younger generation, I get a chance to converse with them, and I see that they have something to say, but they're not being heard. You know, because the police, they're scared. They're scared because, first of all, the majority of the police that's in our neighborhood is not from our neighborhood, not from our culture or whatever. So they don't understand the culture. They heard about what go on in Brooklyn from Jersey or Long Island or stuff like that. They heard about it, so they automatically come into the neighborhood itching. They're nervous. You know what I'm saying? I just feel like if it's going to be police officers in the neighborhood, let them understand the culture. Let them understand who we are. Understand that we all not. You got some bad seeds, some bad apples out there, but we not all like that. You know, I have a son. He's about to be 18 years old. That's nervous to walk outside without me. Yeah. You know, and that's not cool. They about to go back. They soon they're gonna open up the schools to go back. He's like, Dad, I don't want to go. Why you don't want to go? Because I don't know what's going to happen when I leave this house. I'm good as long as I'm with you. But I gotta go to work. I gotta go to work. I gotta take care of him. I gotta be at work nervous if he's gonna make it home, and he's nervous if I'm gonna make it home. Mm-hmm. You know, so and then this whole situation with his uncle, my brother, you know, that's a whole nother story. Because it's like, if they can do that where he was at in Minneapolis and get away with it, and we see all the time in New York, they get away with it all the time. He's nervous it's going to happen again here. And I want to know, you know, since I got your attention, I want to know, how am I sure? How can I be sure that that won't happen to my son? You know, because I'm still going through what I'm going through from what happened. And like I said, I have an 18-year-old. I have a son that's about to be 18-year-old. I have another baby boy that's going to grow up in this. So I'm a concerned father that want to know what's going to happen to protect my boys.
So, Terrence, with what you just said, and Gwen, with what you just said, and I'll tell you that Ben and I, since May, which it feels like 2 months ago, but it's probably 8 or 9 or 10 months ago now, we've been hearing this really across the city, some version of this in many ways. We're hearing from all different New Yorkers in all different neighborhoods. Not always the same story, but pieces, threads of the same. Accountability, discipline, cops stepping in when they see something wrong, new training that we just tried to put into place now. Cops that are listening and hearing the community and don't come in without first knowing, hey, what's the story behind this neighborhood? You know, what are the stories? Who lives here? What culture? I mean, all of this, Ben, right?
Yeah.
We've heard and are trying to address. We are. I'm saying that. You may not believe it, but believe me, we are trying to address all of this, whether it's through training, discipline system. Ben and I sat in a meeting, and we were talking before we walked up on this stage. At 2 to 3 o'clock today, we reviewed probably 15 cases of discipline. They come through us. And we are very much aware, Gwen, of the fact that we have a problem with trust in this city. I try to look at it from not going too far one way or the other, but I have to do what's right. And ultimately, that's since the day I was sworn in as police commissioner, that's on me. I'm not telling you I'm perfect and not going to make a mistake, but do I think about the police officers? Yes, I do. Do I think about you and Terrence, you, and frankly, conversations we've had, and I think about people all over New York City when I make those decisions, because that's how I approach that. And I don't try to throw a blanket on it, but I think this is extremely critical, because I didn't agree with every word you just said, but I agreed with a lot of it. And I think that those types of, I know for a fact that, you know, that's what people feel. And as long as people feel that way, we're not doing a good enough job, or we have more improvement to do. That's the bottom line here. And we're trying to address it through training, through outreach, through changing how we police. You know, we used to police one way. We recognize, you know, you can keep crime down, but if you keep crime down and people hate you, what the heck are we doing? So we've changed a lot in New York City, and we have a lot more. It never ends. We have a lot more to do. We have a lot more work to do in terms of that balance of keeping people safe, but doing it with an olive branch and making them feel like they're part of it, as opposed to they're policing us. So that's why we did neighborhood policing. That's why I put 300 cops into youth offices, youth coordination offices last year to work with kids before they ever get into trouble. So there's a lot that's going on there, but I can't argue with you. You know, we own our mistakes, and we have a lot of work to do. You're saying something there. You don't think we do?
Right.
I saw that. I pick up on those cues.
Can I ask one question before we
Sure.
go on? You're talking about, you know, retraining the police. I feel like when the police come into the academy, they should be properly trained to go out there and do their job properly. And they know what protocol are. They know what they should do in different situations. So I don't think retraining is the answer. I think that it's not the training, because they've been trained. It's following the rules of the training. And this is what they're not doing. They're on their own agenda. They're doing what they want to, however they want to. And this is what needs to change, and this is what needs to be addressed.
I think it's both.
Well, I think it's both, but I also think, you know, I think we have to be careful not to you said it yourself, Gwen, you can't, you know, include everyone within that net, all the officers. And so when it comes to accountability, which we care a lot about, and we spend an awful lot of time holding people accountable. And so, you know, we're the largest police department in the country, 35,000 cops. And so, yeah, we have a few a tiny percentage who are definitely, at times, they're out of line, and they're doing and engaging in conduct, and they're not adhering to their training, and they're not treating people with respect, and they're not, more importantly, they're not understanding that they're a part of the communities. You know, you have to be, when I speak to these young cops, and I speak to them all the time, whether, you know, when they come on the job, we address them, and when we give them, when they swear in, when they're sworn in, and the commissioner will speak to them, I'll speak to them, to really kind of set the tone about they've worked hard to get here, took the exams and did everything that were required, what was required to become an officer, and now they're raising their hand and taking the oath to protect and serve the people of this city. And what we want to remind them of is whatever you were doing before you got this job, whatever your thoughts were, people you were hanging out with. I remember Jimmy used to always say, if, you know, whatever those friends are that you used to hang out with and you know what they were doing that wasn't right, cut them loose, because you're now in a different place and you're doing a different job, and a job that requires your full attention and requires you to be respectful, requires you to be in tune and in sync with the community that you serve. And interestingly enough, Terrence, you know, I remember a time when NYPD, when I came in the job, was 95% white males. And the majority of those folks, or at least half of them, and many more as time would pass, from the time they came on the job, would move out of the city. Now, you know, every class that we hire, right now, this last class we hired, 67% of that class live in the city. And that's been true over the last, since 2014. Every single class that we've hired, we hire quarterly. Every one of those officers, more than half of those people who came on, 50% or more, are residents of the city. So, and they look a lot more like the city. So, you know, folks are foreign born, probably 25 to 30% of the class that comes in. You know, we're a very diverse city, and 25, 30% of those folks were born in foreign countries. They speak, you know, they're bilingual, they're multilingual. So we're getting, I think, you know, from where I remember it and where we are today over this past 50 years in a very different place. That doesn't mean that we still, and training is important, Gwen, it is absolutely important. But for those who choose not to adhere to the rules and decide to exercise their discretion in ways that is inappropriate, or to engage in unconstitutional policing, or just not interested in being you know, respectful of the people that they're coming into contact with in whatever community it is in the city, we hold them accountable. And we're not bashful about, and accountability runs the gamut from holding them accountable and giving them training or instruction, or you know, command disciplines, which is a low level of you know, taking days from them and that sort of thing, right up until and through charges and termination. So, you know, we do that, and in cases where it's necessary, it happens, it gets done, and we try to get better at that, because it's important that the only way the community will come around and feel like they can trust that we're doing the right thing is if we demonstrate that in the way in which we hold the officers accountable.
But what you spoke about hasn't happened with her son case.
No, I understand
them
that.
officers is still on the force to this day. And them officers was getting slapped on the wrist. So when you talk about accountability, it's just slaps on the wrist. Vacation days taken away. That's not discipline. It needs to be much more. They need to be fired. They should not work. The whole world saw Eric Garner scream, "I can't breathe." Them officers should not be held responsible, should be held responsible to the fullest extent in the law. It shouldn't took 6 years just to get one officer fired. So when
Well,
we talk about accountability, it needs to be able to have, it has to do it in sections. It can't take a long time for justice. It can't take a long time to be able to do it, because while you're waiting to be able to do your process, the family is still hurting. The community is still hurting. So it has to be a system that where officers are held responsible in a timely manner. And you have done it in other cases. You have released the video and you have disciplined officers now. But before we even talk about moving forward, we got to deal about what happened back then. We can't pour new wineskin on old wineskin. So we have to deal with these officers first that are rogue, like Sergeant Bosnick, who is rogue, who pull over black and brown people and say they smell weed in the car and harass them constantly. And officers in the 75th precinct, they got 1,300 police misconduct complaints, and they get raises and promotions, or they get some days taken away. So it has to be accountability. You do a great job. Ben, we've been knowing each other for a long time. I'm not that old, but I've been knowing.
Watch it.
But it has to be stricter accountability when it comes down to officers. And I think that's what builds the trust. We've seen the same cycle that happens over and over again in certain cases. And we saw it with Eric Garner.
Well,
we saw it with Sergeant Adonis. We saw it with the other officers that was there. We saw it. So how can you talk about dealing with what happened now, but you have to deal with what happened previously?
Well, let me just respond, because I think, you know, you...
And then I'd like to jump in
Yeah,
there.
You've been very
Kirsten.
quiet.
Yeah, Kirsten.
And that's not like
Uncharacteristic,
you.
that's correct.
You know, I think, you know...
I just want to let you all know that we did stop the live feed. We're having a little bit of an issue with Wi-Fi. I didn't want to interrupt before because obviously this is more than just about the feed, it's about the real conversation. But I do want to let you know that we are not currently live streaming. We'll let you know though when we're about to get it back up. But
You're still recording though, right?
Yeah.
All right, go back to getting them. Go get 'em.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's hard to have, you know, have these conversations and talk in generalities. And so, because there's also these issues around due process and how we process and conduct, the nature of the conduct that the individual is engaged in. You know, Pantaleo was the actor in this tragic case.
He was an actor. He was an actor.
Yeah, he was. The principal actor, you know, and so he was dealt with. Yeah, you mentioned the timeline. I won't go into that. I think most of us know why that was.
No, we don't. We don't know why it took 6 years.
Well, yeah,
Tell us.
I can walk you through it, because so you do know that we acted on him. The grand jury didn't indict him, and we ended
I'm
up.
talking about the police department. I'm talking about what did the police department do to each of those officers.
Well, I'm
in the
gonna tell
process.
you.
Okay, so
Yeah,
don't talk about the grand jury. We know that already.
Right, so, but that's- but
I'm
you
talking about
asked-
what did the police department do
That's
in
part
terms
of the process though, is what.
Yeah,
we're
but
gonna
you
say.
you said it took so long.
Right.
There was a reason that you had that. I mean, I think we learned a valuable lesson. I'll just preface my comments by giving you that sense of it, because we deferred to the DAs to do their thing. We deferred to the Justice Department, which was you know how that went.
Yeah.
And you know,
We
and
shouldn't
that's
have
the
waited
civil
for
rights
that.
case. But so, well, we learned a valuable lesson, Gwen. I
but
think
they
that.
still
Commissioner,
we
can I-
learned the
can I
lesson,
jump- can I jump-
but there's
can I-
nothing happened.
Well, let me
Somebody
just-
learned lessons when stuff happened. I'm
Well,
sorry,
you know, we
Kirsten.
held.
No, that's all right. Let me jump in here, because there's been a lot said that I agree with, a lot said I disagree with. But starting at the Garner case, it didn't take that long for the NYPD to dismiss the black female sergeant that wasn't even on the scene when it happened. There was no protracted litigation or adjudication process to get rid of her. She was not even responsible for command on the scene at that day, but y'all got rid of her like that.
No,
Pantaleo-
not that I don't think that's
well,
right.
that's not the case.
She wasn't dismissed? She wasn't the first officer dismissed in this case?
No.
I don't
No,
think
Who was the
she
first
was-
officer?
She wasn't
No,
dismissed.
she was
job,
dismissed.
yeah.
She's still on job. She
Okay.
was
She was
given-
disciplined.
She was disciplined.
Yeah, she was
First one to be
Exactly.
disciplined.
Exactly.
First one to be disciplined. Y'all don't have a protracted adjudication process there. Didn't take 6 years.
Well, that's because it was a different offense.
Yeah,
Well,
that's-
the
In the
Yeah, it
court's
does.
eyes.
Right, the offense was did not result in the death of a human being. The offense that Pantaleo committed, if you could call it an offense, resulted in the death, unjustifiable death of Eric Garner. But let me just step back for a second, because we're not going to agree on the Eric Garner case. Those cops, many of them are still on the job today. They have padded their pensions. They have advanced in their careers. And y'all have closed the chapter on that. Whether we agree with that or not, that is the reality from where I stand. Gwen is not going to receive full justice. The community is not going to receive full justice in the Eric Garner case. But we're going to use that to propel the conversation forward. We've got the George Floyd policing bill passed. That's now law. There's some things that are going to be done that above this conversation, above our pay grade.
Yeah.
But let me just say, the problem doesn't start with the training.
Come on.
The problem starts with the recruitment and the screening.
Come on.
You're bringing many of the wrong officers on the force in the first place, which then requires all these additional levels of training. We're bringing people on the job who don't see the community as something to be guarded. They see the community as something to be engaged. And we don't need warriors on our streets. We need guardians on our street that see the value of every human being, irrespective of what they look like, where they come from, what their immigration status is, what their sexual orientation is, all of that. But that's not what we're having. We are seeing people who are coming on the job, and I won't discount the improvements we have seen.
Yes.
Right.
I won't say that there has not been progress, because that would just not be intellectually honest. There has been
That's right.
some progress. But as Malcolm X said, if I got 6 inches of knife in my
Come
back,
on, Doc.
and you pull 3 inches out, I still got 3 inches of knife in my back. So let's deal with those 3 inches. If you got 1% of the workforce that's crooked or corrupt or inept or incompetent, if you got 1%, that's 350 people out there with a badge and a gun looking to cause trouble. Now, in my hood, there's never been a crew that deep. So that's a pretty deep crew to be running around the city in a structure that does not provide, from my estimation, full accountability. And here's where I think we may agree. We may agree that you've taken steps to improve the systems of accountability.
Yeah.
We may agree that you have done some things different. But in order for that to happen, we also got to agree that y'all screwed stuff up in the back. That the system that was in place before was inadequate. We can't say we've got an improved system now, but we didn't have a deficient system
listen,
then.
you're right, Kirsten. I'm not saying...
You always got to look at it that way.
Yeah.
And so I think, from my vantage
That's
point,
you
how
talk
we
about
move
the
forward,
racism. That's deep. That's
how we move forward, yes, he said, and I didn't want to bring up the things he said that I agreed with, because then I got to bring up the things he said that I didn't disagree.
You already
that I
called for
disagree
my
with.
firing once.
I did. For full disclosure, I called for your firing multiple times. Not just once.
Wait, why are you laughing?
I gave you.
This is serious now.
I gave you a
Right,
second
Kirsten, he
chance.
turned
because
it.
I'm a preacher. I believe in redemption.
That's it. See?
And so I gave
Thank
you
you.
a second
Thank
chance.
you.
You're still trying to earn
Amen.
your way to heaven. No, you ain't got there yet. You ain't got to heaven yet. You're still earning your way there, Commissioner. But here's the bottom line, because this is a very sober and serious topic. I'm glad we can bring some levity and humanity to the situation.
Well, you have to, because if you don't, man, you just
We'll
can't
get
get
drowned
to
in
it.
it. But here's where I think we need to go. Many of our friends and colleagues and allies have been demanding for a gutting of your budget.
That's right.
Defund the police is now a national movement, a national outcry, and I support it and believe that there needs to be some restructuring of the budget. Where I think we need to talk about is the demilitarization of the department. I think having tanks on American streets is just totally inappropriate, period. You didn't have tanks surrounding the Capitol building, so why do we got tanks on our streets when we have First Amendment activity?
That's right.
Activating...
In New York City you're talking about?
That's right. SRG
Armored
brings the tanks out.
armored carriers.
We don't have any
that's not
tanks.
true.
Come on.
Armored carriers. We can get into semantics. I've seen vehicles on the street that you can't penetrate. You want to call them armored personnel carriers?
The only time that would be out there would be
Yeah.
like a hostage job with
SRG
shots.
has come to many protests with armored
long
tanks,
guns,
with long guns,
fully armed,
with bikes.
body armor,
Yes,
as if
yes.
we are presenting a threat to civil society. That's not what First Amendment protest is. But let's move from there. Demilitarization. Your protest posture was totally off, totally inappropriate from my vantage point. What we saw this last summer, and we saw a lot on both sides.
We did see a
You
lot.
did.
We saw a lot on both sides.
Yeah.
And, listen,
Yeah.
and I'm not. Again, I'm going to be honest about it. A lot of what we saw did not originate out of our movement in our community.
That's right.
We don't subscribe to violence.
That's right.
We don't subscribe to. There is no connection between a Chanel bag
Come on, Doc.
and justice for George or justice for Eric.
That's right.
So anybody that wants to
Yeah.
use those tragedies.
We know that.
Yeah.
So let's agree there.
We know.
But people on bicycles
That's right.
being shoved to the ground, women being shoved to the ground and giving concussions because they were merely on the streets. Squad cars and SUVs
Plowing. That's right.
through crowds of protesters because water bottles are being thrown at them. The posture that the NYPD took towards all protesters, just like all cops ain't bad, all protesters weren't out there to commit violent
And
acts.
we know that.
We agree that.
So, but all of us were subjected to the same
That's right.
posture, which is we are going to be provocative and we're going to be aggressive because we need to demonstrate who's in charge here. Well, from my vantage point, it ain't y'all. From my vantage point, you work for the people of the city of New York. So if the people of the city of New York rise up to make a declaration, y'all fall back and hear the declaration. That's my vantage point. That has not been how the NYPD has proceeded to operate. I would hope, moving forward, as we get involved in the trials and other acts that are going to be inflammatory and provocative that we have to deal with here in the city, we're not going to encounter that kind of posture in a First Amendment act, in a protest, a peaceful protest. And I will finally say this. We got to reimagine policing. That's a tagline that a lot of people have popularized. I don't know what it means for other people. I know what it means for me. We can't put a Band-Aid on a heart attack, and we cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. But what we can do is have a top-to-bottom conversation about budgetary priorities in infrastructure, personnel priorities in infrastructure, and hardened infrastructure. That means police precincts got to be reimagined as a place, instead of a place of incarceration and encaging people, a place where we deal with the humanity of the situation.
Yeah.
Cops can't be subjected to a job that will not respect the fact that they have issues themselves.
That's right.
If a cop wants help on the job
He should get
and he's afraid because he's going to lose his gun in his badge or lose an opportunity for advancement, to come forward and say, I had a bad week and I don't know what to do, and I have problems at home, and I can't pay my private school bill, because cops are people too.
That's right.
Right? Until they can work in a place that holds them accountable, as Gwen has so aptly and articulately stated, hold them accountable not to the training, but hold them accountable to human sensibility. You
the
can't
actions.
train somebody to not be a vicious savage on and stand on somebody's kneel on somebody's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, or to hear somebody cry out 11 times, I can't breathe. That's savagery. You can't train somebody out of savagery, but you can make sure the savage doesn't get on the force in the first place. But we have to have a reimagining of what the job and the role of police is. It's not social worker, So you have no business going to situations where we have emotionally disturbed individuals or individuals who are going through emotional crises. So you shouldn't be doing that. You are not landlords, so you shouldn't be evicting people out of their homes. What you are is to provide for the safety and the security of the people of the city of New York, not the property of the city of New York, the people of the city of New York. And until Gwen and Terrence and everyone else in this room feel protected by the department and the officers feel that they are in a place that values their humanity, then we're going to have this conversation for decades to come. And I'll close. There's going to be people that are pissed off when I say stuff like this, because I say it straight up, whether y'all agree with me or not. Police, community, activists, and the activists are going to be upset and have been upset at my position on this too. If the trauma that we observe in the street manifests itself as crime, then the crime we see coming out of the department can originate with trauma too. And until police officers are not forced into conditions, whether it be through work rules or a culture that subjects them to a machismo that says I can't be a human being and deal with my humanity because I got to be rough and tough 100% of the time, we're going to deal with traumatized police officers who are on the job, inflicting their trauma on everybody else. We've got to have whole police officers, whole human beings.
That's true.
They've got to be as healthy as the community wants itself to be. So we've got to invest in the health and the well-being of the people we entrust with the greatest power in our society. If we have unhealthy cops, we're going to have oppressed community. So we got to deal with that. But at the same time, that can't happen until there is accountability and transparency. You said you own your mistakes. You don't always own your mistakes. You push your mistakes over to the side. This whole idea about transparency in the department and the city fighting against transparency with 50A in Albany is case in point. Y'all don't want us to be able to crack open the personnel books and look inside.
Not true.
That's not true.
Not true.
Well, I mean, y'all
I mean, you put out a halfway report. The report don't even shows the history of this office. You Google one of the officers' name inside the database, and nothing comes up. So
What are you talking
the
about?
history.
Nothing came up.
I'm talking about Officer Dimitri. He was an officer.
No, but I mean recently.
Recently,
D'Amico.
that he was the officer that pushed a young lady during the protest, and they put. I'm talking about Garner. I'm talking about another officer
another one.
that was with Craig Ellerman from the 73rd Precinct. Him on the same day, he pushed a young lady. On that day, he was disciplined, but we don't know what it was because it's not in that system. That same system.
Because it's probably an active case.
It may not
and
be
then
done
if he
yet.
was proven innocent, it wouldn't be there. And if he's guilty, then you'll see
Oh,
it.
he just
No,
has
he
not
was
be done
guilty.
yet. There's a
That's
Something
how,
that happened
that's
on
how
a,
I made the decision to
something
set it
happened on the
up.
borough
And we
level. It
acted
wasn't
on
like,
those cases
so on the borough
immediately,
level,
but
we
there is a
couldn't find it.
process.
Yeah.
So, so it's just
Well,
that.
if you come back to me with
Oh, yeah, you
specifics,
will.
I'll either tell you you're right and you're wrong, and this is why, somewhere in the middle.
Yeah,
But I'll get to the bottom of it. But we just put out the 58, Jimmy O'Neill before me, and Ben was there as his number 2. And I myself said, there's nothing more important than transparency. Do I have concerns about some things with putting officers' addresses and things? Yeah, I do.
Nobody wanna know their
But we
addresses.
supported 50A, and we built the probably the biggest dashboard of information than any police department in the country, and it went live this week. It's not perfect.
It's not
I made
also, it's not
decisions to
complete.
hold some information back. I think that if a cop gets a complaint and is found innocent of it, then he's the same as a person in the street. You may not agree with that, but trial decisions, the whole decisions to read, the CCRBs, we put a lot out there.
You keep databases of people who are not found guilty and stuff. You keep databases
DNA
of people from the community who are arrested or engaged by police that are not found guilty of stuff?
Reverend, we follow the law. So if
Right.
something's sealed, it's
They
sealed.
get sealed
And
and-
we're not releasing that to people that shouldn't have it. But
But that's you should have it. Why do you maintain the database of innocent people? You're saying we can't maintain a database of innocent cops, but y'all can maintain a database of innocent New Yorkers. So there's some hypocrisy in how you view it. Look, you as the police commissioner, sir.
Yes, sir.
You have the power to summarily dismiss officers for certain things. We've
Yes.
seen it.
That's right. Immediately.
I gotta follow due
immediately,
process, though.
You
I can't.
gotta follow your conscience.
Yeah, but
Both.
when
We've
the
seen-
process, when you submit Officer David Frando, that was on the boardwalk, you took immediately, within 2 hours that happened.
Suspended.
You suspended him. That's what we're
I
saying.
can't fire him.
You can't
That's
fire him,
not
but you
fine,
did
that's
something
suspended. Yeah.
and you could have done something for the other officers.
Yeah, they
I know
didn't
you
even
said don't talk about
suspend the
Gwen,
officers
but
that
there's
was in
other
my case.
officers that is in this city
And they
that
blatantly
goes to
seen that they
300,
were
the
wrong.
1%. That 1%, those
Yeah.
officers, they need to be held accountable. And this stuff happens. That's why I said,
Not arguing that.
You definitely
get
took
'em.
it.
Go get them. Because they still out there.
Balance.
They're throwing our kids up against the walls
Yeah,
at
like-
night. You
like
can see
Sergeant-
video every day. For months, we saw video after video after video dropping. People weren't getting shot. No, they were just getting roughed up. They were just having their rights violated. You know, there was a claim that stop and frisk, the era of stop and frisk, ended. I would suggest
No, it
it
didn't.
evolved.
No, it
No, it
didn't.
didn't.
It
didn't.
evolved into social distancing enforcement.
That's
right.
It evolved
It
into
did.
now.
Sergeant Bosco, that's why I said his name specifically, because he has a history, and you can check this out. This is not something I'm making up. He has a history of pulling people over and saying that, oh, I smell weed.
The sergeant pissed you off. Huh?
So he can be able to go out and harass and give them something, and he's out of the 6-7. And it's constant stuff like that happens in our community. You talked about on Channel 11, the inspector of the 7-5. The same inspector was on the scene. People didn't even know he was an inspector. Without a mask.
You're talking, I know the
I'm
incident
John
you're talking
Maserati,
about.
that's right. Without a mask and inciting other officers, more officers coming to the scene, officers hitting people right in front of him under his leadership. So if you want to be able to get rid of these bad apples, and you say, well, he's going to be here next week. No, that's not. You got to hear the community saying they want him out of there. They started a petition. They want him out of there because he doesn't. Everything starts with leadership. If you have leadership, and it's going in the direction in terms of having the input with the community, the clergy, the borough president, and the community council dealing with that process in terms of having them pick their commander. That's a good step in that direction in terms of that process.
Thank you.
Well, you know, so yes. So it's,
No, the credit for these conversations should accrue to you for the current leadership. It is not the leadership we've seen in the past.
Right.
It is not the department we've seen in the past.
Correct.
But it is still a department that the community fears.
Can I agree? I got to say a couple things. We've talked, there's no way I'm going to answer everything that's been said here. There's
Why
so
not?
much.
Close the door,
Yeah.
Bishop. Lock the door.
Hey, you better
Bishop.
get some food then.
We tricked you because
That's all right.
at the church we got something called a shut-in. We about to do a shut-in. We're going to work through this tonight. Ain't nobody leaving here till the department is fixed. Period. Bishop, you got us?
Oh,
I mean,
God.
I'll say a couple things. We talked a couple times about how it takes so long to get somebody fired or to get proper discipline. I think if that trust was there, if there was trust, people would be more inclined to say, you know what, it's going to take a while, but I know at the end it's going to be done right. We don't have that today.
sure
There ain't
don't.
trust,
Not
and
at
it
all.
takes long. That's a bad recipe right there. But we do have rules to follow in terms of due process. Officers have rights too. Sometimes things that look ugly aren't going to be disciplined. And you don't like to hear that sometimes, but that's a fact too.
Yeah, it's
What you said, Reverend, about the warrior versus the guardian, I mean, that's well known in law enforcement circles, and I could not agree more. And Yeah, I don't think we're hiring the wrong people.
I do.
I don't. Some?
Well,
Some
you
of
know,
Some?
of
Yeah,
them,
yeah,
yes,
that
I do.
1%. That
Name me a
1%.
profession where we don't. I mean, that
Yeah,
happens
I mean,
in every
yeah.
profession.
It do,
And
it do.
this is a unique profession where we ask an awful lot of these people to deal with some real tough circumstances at times. There's no doubt that there's
That's
people
true.
on this job that shouldn't be police officers.
Yeah.
It's our job to weed them off. You may not agree with this. I'm telling you, cops don't want them on the job. Not always, but a lot of cops don't want bad cops on the
right,
job.
because it makes
The
it,
majority
yeah,
don't.
you know.
But I don't think we're hiring really the wrong people. It is certainly complicated, and it's not all training. There's no training
No.
for what happened to your brother. That's not training.
Well,
That's
that's-
not
that's-
being
No
a
training
human.
happened to him, Garner.
That's not being a human being. I mean, that's, you know, I mean.
That's why they should be disciplined.
But what kind of psychological test, like, because this is,
Well,
I think this is where it really comes from. And y'all probably give a multiple choice or
No,
a
no,
yes,
Gwen.
no answers or.
No, Gwen, no, here's how it works, Gwen. You know, every officer takes an exam. It's the entrance exam. After that, if they pass the exam, they'll go on a list, and then they'll hire it off that list. When they're hired off that list, before they even are hired, they come in, they have to go, they get an investigator. The investigator begins to look into their background because you have to take it further. So that's part of the process as well. There's a psychological exam that they take and they go through. Every single officer.
Right.
And so the challenge is, one time when they
that's
come
not
in.
enough.
No, but wait.
Let the
So-
man finish before we...
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you know, I mean, we could always, see, this is the conversation we could always have about how we improve the system, and we've talked about that, but we talked about it in the context of making sure we have the right psychologists, right?
Right.
And investing in people who, you know, you bring on and they have some longevity in the agency. But so the psychological, here, we're all human beings, right? And so you go through the test, you pass the psychological, right? And now you're going to be hired, right? You get hired. But that doesn't mean, now some people, I think, some of the cases we see in our discipline that come before the PC and myself, I will tell you that, I mean, some of these folks that we've seen, you know, that have been investigated, and most of those, some of those were investigated by Internal Affairs, and we figure out and we know who they are, and we see the conduct they've engaged in, and now they're gone, they've been terminated, and gone to prison in some cases. But you begin to ask yourself, how did that person ever get on the job? And the answer is, there was nothing to tell. There was nothing in that person.
Doesn't that mean there's a problem with the screening?
No,
The psychological exam?
Kirsten, no, it doesn't.
No?
You wish you had a
I
magic
see.
wand, but there ain't a magic
You got it.
wand.
Sometimes it is what it is, right? And you you do the best you can, and you do the screening. And the screening, by and large, 90%, 95% or more, is accurate.
Go ahead, Terrence.
And then
Accurate for what are you capturing? What information?
no,
about
what
that
I mean by
individual are you capturing
well, what I
in the
mean by
process?
that is of the 36,000 cops, 35,000, it's a tiny percentage that ultimately may do something, engage in some conduct that is certainly, you know, the kind of conduct that they should be terminated for. But you don't always know. That's all I'm saying. So, and to the point, the PC's point.
Was Daniel Pantaleo wrong for what he did to Eric Garner?
Without a doubt.
Was Daniel Pantaleo wrong for what he did to
Yeah,
Eric
and I
Garner?
said it at the time.
So
And the other officers.
So if that's the case, you are at the same time saying a psychological screening that allows for a man to choke the life out of someone who's screaming out or gasping for breath, I can't breathe, 11 times, that individual, that there's no dysfunction or malfunction.
No, I
with
didn't say
screening
that.
process?
I'm saying that it wasn't, when he came on the job and went through his psychological examination, nothing surfaced that would have suggested that at some point down the road he was going to take someone's
But
life.
that's why we
did
need to
things
change the
before
process
that.
to be able to have them have more
gotta
psychiatric
fix the
officers.
He did things before
Well,
that. He
the-
shouldn't have even been out there that day, I'd say,
Yeah,
because
but like I said,
And that's what we have to improve upon. And we've gotten better with it, with early intervention and tracking people down who begin to display behavior that suggests that they have problems. Civilian complaints, and civilian complaints are down overall over the last couple of years.
Yeah,
But you have to look at so there are a number of indicators. You mentioned supervision before, right? And Kirsten mentioned it, you did, and you did, Gwen. Supervision is important. It is critical. I harp on it all the time because it's without supervision, without the sergeant, and I always speak to the new sergeants, new lieutenants, to really send this point home, because first of all, those 6 or 8 officers, when you become a sergeant, that are in your charge, you need to be able to know who they are. You need to know them by name. You need to get to know their habits. You work in the same platoons and all. And you need to win something. To your point about, whether we take care of each other in terms of their mental health, right? We had 10 suicides 2 years ago.
That's right.
All right. When that happens, somebody has to flag it. So now we created an entire apparatus around this issue in terms of health and wellness, because we realized that after those suicides, how incredibly important it is for us to try and get a handle on what it is that is wrong with an officer, and if something changes in their demeanor, to pick up on that and say, hey Ben, are you all right, kind of thing. So we have a process in place now. We've got volunteers, who provide that service and who work with people that they work with to keep an eye on them, and the supervisors do the same thing. So the other point that you made, Kirsten, had to do with the whole notion of trust, and the health and wellness side is just one piece of it. But how the disciplinary system works is critical, because if the disciplinary system, when I came back and the one that I saw, when I was still in the job years ago, wasn't what it should be. And so if you're not holding officers accountable, you recognize they've got a problem, and you're not first of all identifying that they have a problem, and then disciplining them and doing it properly. Or whenever an officer gets in trouble, but they languish in the system, or they get sued and they're not ever told that they've been part of a lawsuit, right? Or they've been told, but now they never get an update. That historically in the department, we didn't necessarily keep track of that in a way in which it should have been. All of that is stressful, and the whole point about trying to build trust outside the community is really absolutely critical. But it is also equally important to build trust inside, because if you treat these officers well, to your point, Kirsten, then they will pass that on to the citizens, right? And so I think we've gotten to a point now where everybody knows, everybody's on notice. We have this new discipline matrix we just put into place with presumptive penalties for the conduct that they engage in, and in many of those instances, for very serious conduct, the presumptive penalty is termination.
but not many.
Well, it is now, though, Gwen. I mean, it is now, and that's a huge step. I mean,
You can start with those 3 officers with us.
That's what I
know.
What about those who have slipped through the cracks?
You got
Who are
to.
now, they started out here, now they're detective, now they're sergeant, now they're lieutenant,
Now they're commanding
now
officer.
they're commanding officer, the 75th, right, or wherever, because that's not the only precinct.
That's right. 7-3,
we have
7-5,
what I would
7-7.
characterize as rogue leadership
Yep.
And how
that are
did
not comporting with the example you're trying to set for them, that are instructing their officers drive this crime thing down.
Yes, sir.
Do what you got to do to get these guns and drive crime down. That is the political pressure being put on you both, on your department, and you don't have to acknowledge it. We can read between the lines. We know there are people that are saying this is unacceptable and unsustainable, and we can't rebuild and kick back New York until you guys get a hold of this problem.
I'm going to correct you there. It is unacceptable.
Right.
But it is unacceptable with the level of gun violence that we're seeing.
Absolutely.
Right, we all agree on that.
That's right.
But we also, it's not lost on us.
Right.
We have to do it the right way. We have to do it constitutionally. And the better way to do it is doing it with the community than doing it to the community. So
Don't disagree.
there
So what do we
is
do?
pressure. There is pressure to
So what do we
keep.
do with these instances where the kids on the street are being thrown up still today, Commissioner, being thrown up against walls or on the ground? Some of them are videoing and the cops are taking the phones and smashing the phones or confiscating the phones so that you don't have the video evidence, and they're running roughshod over these kids. It's still happening today. What is their recourse in this new era of accountability that you all are trying to design and implement? What is their recourse? Is it the same process that failed them before? CCRB complaint, internal affairs investigation,
Years.
unsubstantiation, no discipline. Maybe years of investigation, maybe substantiation, maybe it goes to you, months later. But I guarantee you all these videos of these kids that are going through this that we're seeing, that are getting sent to us, some of them we're seeing on Facebook or whatever, I guarantee you those are not getting to you. They're not,
Some
you're
of them-
not seeing that.
Some of them are.
Some
of
get
them
there.
are.
And so what happens in those instances?
And I don't think there's an easy fix for that. Because if I said there was an easy, I think it's a lot of different things. I think it's, some of the traditional things are available. You said. You
So
can
when
make
will
a
it get
complaint. If
fixed?
people
We
don't
gonna
have
wait till
faith in the
somebody else
complaints,
gets killed
that's
to
a
get it
problem.
fixed or try to fix it?
But well, we are.
We don't
are,
have
Gwen.
that kind of time because once a person is dead, they're dead.
No, we
Yeah.
hear you. And we're not letting it slide. We're not.
But
But
I
if-
think it's a combination of, I'll tell you some of the things that we're doing and trying to do. I can't speak for Fred Davey and CCRB, that's a separate entity, but that would be a first recourse. If you're telling me that people don't have faith in that, then that's a problem, but I could tell you,
How long did it take to get a case number?
Oh my goodness, it took over 2 years to get a number.
You guys provide the case numbers to the CCRB for
We
them to
pleaded
even
to the police
investigate.
officer,
The
to
same
the
thing
police
with-
department. All we need is a case number to go forward with this case. They took over 2 years to give us a case number. I mean, if that's not
That shouldn't be- well,
I
procrastination,
can't believe that would happen
Yeah.
today.
not today, it happened to me. It happened to me.
It happened with Walter Isaacs in the Delron Small case. They still waiting for a departmental trial. So that's under your leadership. So
Hold
No,
on, let's
that's-
be fair and
yeah.
let's be honest now.
That's right.
With that case, CCRB came to us and said, we want to go forward with this case. Now, in that particular case, the officer has been arrested, brought to trial in Brooklyn, I believe,
Yeah,
Yep.
and
Queens.
found not guilty by a jury of his peers.
that's true.
Civilian Complaint Review Board had the ability to then bring him up on a civilian
And
complaint.
that's what they're doing.
I had the ability to stop that from happening, and I did not stop it from happening. So to
That's
tell the
true.
whole story,
Absolutely.
that case is
But
now
you also
going to
have the
be,
ability to be able
go
to set a
forward in the
date.
department, and
You
what
also have the
happens.
ability to set a date, so it won't have the long. It
No,
took
the date
6
has been
years.
set.
So it has not been set. When you have a long
for that
The
process-
trial?
decision to go
It's
forward
been
was only
made-
within the, I want to say the last month.
Yeah,
So
it's
I don't
before
know
that.
if there's a date or not yet, but
I
it's not
think-
going to be 6 years. It's not,
Yeah,
Reverend.
in
It's not
fact,
gonna
I
be
think,
6 years.
and then we'll set the trial
And
commissioner,
listen,
will set the date as soon as she
Don't
gets.
make any preconceived notions, because ultimately that would come to me.
Right.
That's a process that the Civilian Complaint Review Board now will try the case, and it will fall where it falls. But there's going to be a day in court.
I'm sorry,
Can we get
Terrence,
a
you wanted to say something?
Can
Sorry,
we get,
Terrence.
Can we get a commitment, because part of the
Agony.
maze, the labyrinth, the hamster wheel that the Garner family and community was put on was this smoke and mirrors, shell game. We got to wait for,
Prosecutors,
Donovan
yep.
blew it, Staten Island, abdicated his responsibilities, protect life, defend the Constitution, according to our belief. Fine. Get to the department, we got to wait for the feds.
And you don't.
Feds drag their feet, up until the last
The
day
very
before
day,
statute of limitation
that 5th year.
eliminates.
Then they said that they wasn't going to go forward with charges, and everybody in the nation knew before the Garner family.
Yeah.
Everybody in the nation.
So can we get it, because that was a deviation from prior practice of the
Right.
city.
Yeah.
I could cut you off.
Can we not do
I
that?
can tell you that we have done.
That we're not gonna
We have done
be
a
subjected
bad
to that?
job. We know that. We
Yeah,
have done
we-
a bad job of looking at, we look at things from our view. I think a lot of people do this, right? But we haven't done as good a job looking at things from the victims at times,
Right.
from the complainants and types of this. There's no doubt you're right. We can do a lot better, and no one should wait that long. You can't make determinations of what is going to happen, but no one should, that's just common decency too. That we should do better than that.
And
You
we
shouldn't
learned-
have to wait
yeah,
that
we-
long.
and we learned a
Another
valuable
question
lesson.
I would like to ask.
Sure.
How do an officer on desk duty make a 6-figure salary? How does that happen?
I don't, what do you mean?
So she's saying that the officers in her son's case, they're currently on desk duty, and they make 6 figures. So she's saying that because of the simple fact that charges, different disciplinary actions has transpired, some lost vacation time, some.
Yeah,
got
right,
some-
right.
So how can that very officer, for the death of Eric Garner, now sit behind a desk
And make a
6
6-figure, make
that-
over $130,000 a year?
Well, we ended up getting sued over this issue in court, and because I guess it was PBA, because I think it was White Shield officer. So we ended up getting sued about, and the issue was, so they're on modified assignment and they work in a desk, and they took us to court saying, well, because we were said you're not
We restricted the
overtime.
Right, that's why I don't understand.
And the court said you can't restrict the overtime. You can't treat them differently. And what happens is, see, this is the catch-22 that as managers, as people who run the agency and who get why you're asking this question, and we try to adjust on some of these things where we can. It doesn't always work, because you have when it comes to the unions, and the unions are a factor in so much of this stuff.
No question.
There's no, and it's like, New York is tough, but there are places around the country, our colleagues, forget about it, it's worse.
I
It is
don't know
worse.
if anybody worse than Lynch.
Well, I'm not talking about the individual. I'm talking about.
you
I'm talking about the
controls the
Can I
union.
just say, we got 10, I'm getting the word, we got 10 minutes left, so.
Don't pay that no
Yeah.
mind. We ain't paying. Look, you got Mullins,
That's right.
who
Come on.
called a commissioner out of her name.
That's right.
Called her the B word. No disrespect. And these are still cops.
Said on national
Yeah.
TV.
These are still
with
cops.
Conan.
Who
That shouldn't be allowed.
espouses the same conspiracies that QAnon is
Come on, come on.
As the president of the Sergeant Benevolent Association. Where's the discipline of,
Well, he's
that
being
cop?
brought up on charges as we
Pat
speak.
Lynch consistently says
what's gonna happen to him?
irresponsible
Probably
and
not gonna
inflammatory
happen to
stuff.
Well,
Because they
it
get
hasn't
rid
come to us yet.
Discipline
It'll
that
come to
cop.
us.
So as far as I'm concerned, y'all are responsible, because they still on the payroll. They still on the force. You are responsible for holding some clown that would call a commissioner a B and espouse QAnon's theory, and another union boss who's consistently fanning the flame of discontent and provocation between police and community on a consistent basis. Y'all have the authority as their bosses, because they still on the job. They
No, you see,
Yeah.
you have the
Kirsten,
authority to know that
they are
of
employees, but they're also union, and they get a pass on some of this stuff.
No, well, y'all need to get rid of that
shouldn't.
union, because
But
they're
they're the unions,
affecting us.
and you can,
That affects us.
So and I understand.
I'm going to say it a little differently. They're certainly members of the New York City Police Department, and Ben is right. They're union heads, so you have to look at the landscape slightly different. You may not like it, but you do. In their role as union heads and their God-given right, freedom of speech,
Yeah,
they may
it's
say
a
some things that you
combination.
don't like, You got
But-
to take the good with the bad
It
sometimes.
shouldn't be
And
tolerated.
but-
We
but-
need
that
some,
should not
some
let me-
black
I'm
police
not-
officers
but I'm
to
not
run
done.
against-
Hold on, you gotta
to
let
run-
me finish.
I'm sorry.
With that being said, there's always lines to cross, and I'm not singling anyone out and starting anything here. There's always lines. If anyone says something that I have the ability to discipline or that crosses lines, and sometimes it's awfully gray, then that's a different matter. But Ben's right in terms of, you are afforded certain rights, and Lord knows this is an awfully political year, and this person's saying something and this person
Yeah.
doesn't like it. There's a lot of things said that I don't like, that you can't get into that.
There's a difference between saying something you don't like, and I can't run around yelling fire in a crowded theater.
Great.
There's certain speech. The First Amendment does not protect all
That's
speech.
correct.
It does not protect speech that results in violence. It does not protect the kinds of speech that we have seen coming from the leadership in the past out of the White House that has been reflected in the union leadership that are in office today. Now, do I respect unions? Absolutely. I gotta respect unions because I fight alongside them on many issues. These union heads are intentionally provocative and inflammatory and part of the problem. And the fact that they can say certain things that it's not about irritating us because we're easily irritated by people in badges and guns. That's a low standard. I wouldn't go by that standard to be fair to you. But there are things that go above. There's no reason that an officer in the employ of the NYPD, with the platform that Mullins has, should be allowed to dehumanize and denigrate
That's what I said.
a fellow public servant like he did the commissioner. That should never be allowed to be. There's no speech in the
And he
world
gets a pass?
that says that he
Well,
can call her
he's not going to get a pass
That's all right.
because
he's being sued
CCRB,
now, but-
well, CCRB is moving and probably.
But what can you guys do? That's
Yeah,
a
what
question.
can- it's not
It's not
also
just- you
limited.
got
That we-
Pat Lynch is
What can you
tweeting at
do?
elected officials, threatening them.
Threatening.
And through tweets. So Jimmy O'Neill, who was a good guy, before I used to call him thumb gangster.
Yep.
He stays on the tweeting inflammatory, disrespectful, from my point of view, violations, should be violations of departmental policy, tweeting, threatening the careers, and in some instances, if you look at it a different way, threatening the well-being of elected
Congressman.
officials that he disagrees with.
Can I go in a different direction? You made your points there?
No, I didn't.
We may only have, depending on if we have a kidnapping here, but we may only have a few minutes left. So Terrence, I wanted to give you an opportunity, or Gwen, anything else. And the one thing, as I'm sitting here and listening and hearing everything said,
Part two?
well, we could do a part two for sure, but
I'm basically.
the trial is coming up, and it's, we went through the summer of protests here, and ultimately out of this, it's, I think of this meeting is, what do we do from here?
You
We
gotta
know we
take
have a lot.
SRG away from the protest.
That's right.
SRG
I'm
is the problem.
disappointed in some
I'm
of the
not talking
things.
about the protests, I'm
It
talking about New York
seems like
City
the
and
ones
healing.
with the most power have hardly any power when it comes to the union. It's like you're afraid of them. Why? I mean, y'all can't do anything when they are out of line.
Well, it depends on how you define. That's the question. It depends on how you
He
define out of
called
line.
him out of his name, and he called a member of
being out of line.
Congress, Richie Torres, out of his name, called a employee, a commissioner, out of her name. Something has to be done. It's not just the CCRB. You can't just put the thing on the
Well, I tell you
CCRB.
what, if something has to be done, then we should probably stay quiet about it and let them do what they got to do. Because they certainly not going to be empowered to go out and do it because the activists told them
That's
to.
right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we
we
have
are
made
little
our
people.
point.
Leave
on
it-
that.
leave it,
But
yeah.
I do think there needs to be, and you do have standards for police officers outside of uniform.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
And
Right.
civility is always a good idea.
I mean, it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
At the very base of this public service thing, there should be the concept of service to the public.
Because if it continues like this, they'll be firing you.
Right. But see, that's
If I had my way.
I would say is that listening and hearing community concerns in terms of what you have really done throughout the time that you have been there has been superb. Not just having these window wash conversations, but really having these conversations of people that you can hear that are critics of you, or the critics of the police department. Those things are needed to not just be one-sided.
Well, that's who you have to listen to.
Yeah.
And more important than that, action has to come out of it.
That's
But can I
right.
just say one thing, too? You talked about diversity before. You talked about people coming on the job. Ben talked about percentages of, the recent class we have. We have a police officer test in June. I've been very vocal. We have a police officer test in June. It's the first one in years. There's 3 weeks that you can file for it.
I'm not
Next
taking
month, I
it.
think.
He did look at me.
I said I'm not taking it.
He looked at me.
That's a serious question, though, but we need help.
Here's the part-
We need help, people coming on.
Here's the problem y'all keep running into. The problem is we can't go deep in the hood with that message. A, because they don't trust y'all, and look at the police department as antagonists, and B, their records.
That's right.
The criminalization of black people, brown people,
Got it,
has
man.
been so extensive
Yeah. Come
on.
that many of them who may have been on a track to become law enforcement have been disqualified
Exactly. To begin
because
with.
of the records that they have, maybe justifiably in some cases, maybe unjustifiably
Well,
in
some of
cases,
it's, yeah.
saddled with. So then maybe one of the pathways forward is that we all go to the legislature together
Yep.
and say there needs to be a revamp. We need to be able to give some of these people a second chance.
Right.
And maybe there are classes of these individuals that if we took the time to review, could see possibilities in them. And maybe collectively we can go and say, here is a structural problem that we are running into in recruiting from these communities. We have a criminalization problem we've got to fix. And maybe that's something we can do jointly. I'm sure you don't want all of Mookie and them cousins, but at least one or two of them.
At least Junebug in them, at least.
And why can't all the police officers be hired within the New York City area?
Yeah, that's
Well, listen, I hear this a lot, Gwen, about police officers, why can't they just come from New York City? That is, it used to be, back in the day, that was a problem because of what we just spoke about earlier, right? About, officers, primarily who were white officers who lived outside of the city, didn't have a stake in this. And this is this was the late 60s, right? And this was an issue nationwide. It wasn't just urban settings, it was nationwide. Police departments, first of all, probably 1% of the cops in the country had a high school or college degree, 1%. So after the Kerner Commission, after the riots in '68 and the death of Dr. King, a number of things happened with the commissions. But one of them was this notion of sending cops, or making money available so cops could get a college degree, right? The notion was these folks will be able to be more enlightened, if they understand the issues around diversity and that sort of thing. And it's a premise, and it made sense, and no one, you wouldn't take it to the bank and say if Ben Tucker gets a college degree and then he's not going to be racist, or he's not going to be homophobic, or he's not going to be this. But you have a shot that maybe he'll be more enlightened. That was a good thing. And so that was important to do, and we benefited from it, I think, in policing. I know we benefited in this city, but other places around the country, because we had a whole cadre of people, my contemporaries, who came into the department. And I could have been one of those kids. I got stopped. I grew up in Bed-Stuy. I grew up, down in Clinton Hill, Fort Greene, later in my teens, and we used to get busted all the time.
Would you get busted?
Don't say too much. He's your attorney.
Hold on. You went from, he went from, yeah, he used to get stopped. Yeah, we not busted.
They used to break out chops all the time, man, and it wasn't pleasant. So the fact that I came in, but what I tell our young kids today, you'd be amazed at the amount of young people we have contact with who maybe even living on the edge. Kids who were going to schools where they were, the principal will tell me, out in Coney Island, there's a little principal, I call her little because she's like 4'11", but she's tough, April Leon. And she has managed to corral and get some of her kids and get them in touch with us and work with them. And they're like ambassadors now for being involved. These kids wear junior police academy shirts in their neighborhoods who wouldn't otherwise have done that because of April and a lieutenant that we had back then working with them who's now retired. And then, and we connect with kids in a variety of ways in that way. So you just got to be able to. When I was a cop on the street, I worked South Shore High School when it opened. Wow. And all in Brooklyn South, and those schools, Madison.
When it opened?
Yeah. And you see, you guys.
You remember
that's
when the
not
building
right.
was white.
Yeah, well, it was only 1970, but you can touch these kids, and sometimes you touch them and you influence them, and you don't even know it.
No, that's right.
There's kids that I still speak to. There's people on this job and that came into this job, and there's people who work in the DA's office and elsewhere who tell me that the reason they became involved in criminal justice is because they saw me walking my beat at the school or how I dealt with the kids at the school. That makes a huge difference. And so not all of our kids, we just need to be able to touch them and give and if we can get their trust, gain their trust, then they will, they will realize that this is a way to really think about law enforcement.
Most of our kids, Commissioner.
Yeah.
Most of our kids are good kids.
We had a case recently, and I'll end it from me with this one. Remember the Far Rockaway story?
Yeah.
We have a mentoring program where we do
Right.
cops with kids, football, with the Board of Ed. You can't join the team if you don't show up at class. You need help with class. The teachers say the attendance went through the roof, the grades went through the roof, and she told the one story. Now the cop comes back and goes into the hallway, and cops are there in uniform. Kids that used to want nothing to do with the cops run down the hall and jumped into the cops' arms. So
Yeah,
that's what we need more of.
Yeah, Saturday Night Lights, the basketball program, Saturday Night Lights.
Yes, you got the last word.
You said about the cops interacting with the youth. My biggest activity when I was younger in Brooklyn was the PAL right there on Liberty.
Yeah.
What happened to that building? Why it's not there no more?
I don't know the PAL.
Yeah,
You're talking about the community center now, that NYPD.
It's a community
took it
center
over.
now.
Yeah, the NYPD community center.
Oh, 127
Yeah,
Penn.
27 Penn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an NYPD facility that we do programs for the community
Yeah.
in there.
Oh, okay.
Specifically kids.
It's
We
open.
got a
do
plane,
sports,
an
we do
aviation
gym.
program.
but
Yeah,
we do-
It's just not called PAL no more.
That's
No,
right.
it just
Oh,
is.
But
Yeah.
it's,
But it's the
listen, you want
same
to go,
building.
we'll give you a tour. They have mentoring in there, they have homework going on in there. It's a beautiful facility.
Okay.
Yeah, you should check it out.
Yeah.
And you know, it makes a difference.
Instead of run by PAL, it's run by the police department.
Okay,
So
okay.
a lot of good stuff going on.
Yeah.
I want to thank Gwen. Thank you so much for sitting here.
Thank you, Gwen.
Thanks for having me, having this conversation, although I know we need to further the conversation.
We will. We could stay in
Terrence,
touch.
thank
We're
you
not.
so
We're
much.
I
listening.
appreciate y'all.
I
to
get it.
Reverend McCall, Reverend Floyd,
Yes.
thank you so much. Bishop, if you're around somewhere, thank you for your prayers and thank you for hosting us today. Everyone, thank you.
We're going to turn